Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our second of our 250th webinar series. Tonight, we have Joel Bohy joining us, speaking about his book, Bullet Strikes from the First Day of the American Revolution. My name is Derek Heidemann. I'm the Director of Collections and Research here at the museum. And I'm very excited to be sharing this with you tonight. Our whole goal for the 250th with these programs and with our programs more generally at Old Sturbridge Village is to focus on the early memory of the revolution and how we continue to remember the revolution today. And what Joel will be talking about tonight with his book is an excellent example of how the popular memory of something from the revolution continues to change, especially with lots of research. So a little bit of background on Joel. One second here, let's pull up. Okay, so Joel is a historic arms specialist and a frequent appraiser of arms and militaria on the PBS series Antiques Roadshow. He has also appeared on Nova, History Hit, and American Rifleman TV, is an active member of the American Society of Arms Collectors, as well as the Company of Military Historians, the Colonial Society of Massachusetts, an instructor of advanced metal detecting for the archaeologists, and technical advisor to American Veterans Archaeological Recovery. He is the co-author of Bullet Strikes from the First Day of the American Revolution, which he'll be speaking out tonight, as well as many other material culture articles and man-at-arms for the Gun and Sword Collector magazine, American Rifleman magazine, as well as other publications. Joel grew up in Concord and helped his passion for April 19th and the battles of Lexington and Concord really began because of his growing up there and learning more about all this cool stuff we're going to learn about tonight. So with that, Joel, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to talk about this great work you've done.
All right. Well, thank you to those who are going to be listening. Hopefully, I don't bore you too much with our research, but to be honest with you, I've found it extremely fascinating doing this project. But before we get into the bullet strikes, I've got to talk a little bit about how we got started on the project, as well as the ballistics of the arms and what type of arms are being used. We'll start off with that. So in 2013, I began working with the Park Service on the Parker's Revenge Archaeology Project. And while doing that project, I met up with Dr. Doug Scott in the Black Jacket. He is known for his work at the Little Bighorn battlefield, identifying shell casings with fingerprint impressions or firing pin impressions that he was able to track troopers and Native American forces around the battlefield. So I had been watching his work for years and watching him in documentaries, and I finally got to work with him. And it was during that project that we decided that we wanted to do some live fire studies. And through over a few years, and we're still doing them now, experimenting with different things, but we put together a series of reports which are available for free on the American Society of Arms Collectors website. And what we were doing was shooting at different things, metal detecting each musket ball. We had high-speed cameras to record velocity, as well as some great videos. And some of the videos I'll be using in the presentation, like this one here. It's always important to understand how the guns function. Here we've got the flint striking the hammer, and it's going to ignite the powder in the pan. Now, as you can see, this is in real slow motion. Normally, when you're firing the gun, you don't even see this big flash. It happens very quickly. But with this high-speed camera, you can really see it in slow motion how it explodes. And in a couple seconds here, the charge is going to go off. And for those of you who reenact, you'll see why a flash guard is important in a minute. Obviously, I don't have them on the guns, but there it is. Now, this particular charge, it was a double ball load. We were doing some testing with that. So it had a little bit more kick than it normally would have with a single ball. But one of the things that's really important to understand with these guns is windage. And unlike today, windage today is thought of how you sight the gun in. But in the 18th century, windage of the gun was the difference between the diameter of the bore and the diameter of the ball. So on smoothbore guns, you would have a smaller ball than the bore to accept a paper cartridge, as well as the fact that the powder residue builds up in the barrel. And if you didn't use a smaller musket ball, they can jam up in the gun. In Universal Military Dictionary, they describe that as the diameter of the musket bullets differs but 1/50th part from that of the musket bore. For if the shot but just rolls into the barrel, it's sufficient. Another document I found at Mass Archives lists how to care for the guns, that the gun should have bayonets, but it also mentions that each soldier have such cartridges that will slide down without drawing the rammer. So the ball with a paper cartridge would have to be fairly small, a lot smaller than the bore to be able to do that. Another explanation of windage is in Major J. Clark Kennedy's book, The Theory of Musketry, in 1855. And he writes, a musket loaded with a round ball, which by its own weight would rest upon the bottom of the bore. When the piece was held at the present, and being smaller than the bore, there would be windage or a certain space left above the ball. He goes on to say, gunpowder, when fired, acts with equal power in all directions, and when confined, is in the barrel of a musket, forces its way wherever there is the least opposition offered. In this case, therefore, a portion of the force of the charge escapes by the open space above the ball, whilst the force of the remainder of the charge drives the ball onwards. The greater the windage, the greater is the escape and waste of the force of the charge, a matter serious enough in itself, but only a part of the evil effects of windage. For gunpowder acting equally in all directions presses the ball violently downwards as it escapes through the space above, and the ball, driven forwards by part of the charge and downwards by the other part, would strike the bottom of the bore, from whence, following nearly the same law by which the ball would bound off when thrown against a wall, the bullet would pass along the bore, bounding and rebounding. Now, he's a little bit off with that. He's about 98% correct. But with the use of modern technology, we can learn a lot more. But here is his diagram. Obviously, he's shortened and compressed the barrel a little bit, but the ball doesn't actually do that. In this illustration, you can see on the top a musket ball with a paper cartridge rammed home on the powder charge. And there's paper that fills a little bit of the gap above it. But in the next illustration down, you can see as the powder charge goes off, that charge pushes the ball forward. The gases escape over the ball, and you can see the arrow at the bottom where the ball sometimes will scrape the bottom of the bore all the way out of the gun. Here's a great video that shows the windage escaping. Now, this is all gases escaping around the ball. The ball hasn't come out yet. In a second, you'll see the ball pop out of the bore. And then, there it is. And then you'll start to see a little bit of the paper from the cartridge that came out with the windage, with the gases. And then the little musket ball, it's actually a fouling piece, so it's a small bore ball, about a 58 caliber ball. And then what paper didn't burn off behind it. So you could see from that video how much escapes around the ball when you fire. This is a musket ball. I worked on a project where we found 6 musket balls fired on April 19th. This is one of the balls that came out of the ground there at North Bridge. And it's a 0.57-inch ball consistent with being fired from a fouling piece. And you can see that flat mark on it. That's called partial compression banding. And that's from the gases pushing the ball downward and from the back of the ball, and where it scrapes that barrel all the way out of the bore. And here's one from one of our live fire studies where you can see the banding on the side of the ball. So part of it, to understanding the musket balls or the bullet holes, is understanding the guns. And obviously there were Royal Regiment of Artillery had a few men that were out there. You'd have some sergeants with carbines and officers' fusils, but the main guns that were being used were the British pattern 1769 shortland musket with a barrel length of 42 inches, and the British pattern 1756 longland musket with a barrel length of 46 inches. Now, they both have an average bore diameter of 0.78 caliber. A lot of reenactors, I hear them say that they're all 0.75 caliber. They're not. We've done a sampling of 80 original guns with good bores in private and museum collections. And they do average between about 0.76, 0.77, and 0.82. So there's a big difference in the bores. They're not all the same. And that goes with the musket balls also. So if you have a bore that's around 0.77 to 0.82, and you're firing a musket ball where the manual tells you here 14 ball per pound, which equals 0.693, there's a decent amount of space above the ball when you're firing it. And again, this affects accuracy, but we also want to know what size those balls are when we're looking at the bullet holes. We've also been doing extensive studies on our archaeology projects, as well as collections like Fort Ticonderoga, where they have an immense quantity of musket balls. And we spent a lot of hours sitting down and recording the data from each musket ball. Here are a few. The one on the left, 0.69, that came from a British fort site that was used by the British only during the Revolutionary War in the Caribbean. And there was a sampling of balls that were picked up there that we weighed to get the diameter of these unfired or dropped musket balls. And the one above it, which I'll be talking about a little bit later, came from the Merritt Monroe House in Lexington and was fired on April 19th and is consistent with being a .70 caliber. But you can see on the upper left, they do have a range from 0.67 to 0.72, so they're not all the same. And again, when you have a bore that has a lot of variety in size and the balls that have a variety of size, you're going to have more windage on some than others. Provincial arms are all over the place as to what was being used. One of the more common guns is the fowling piece. This particular example was carried by Robert Chaffin of Acton, and it's a really long gun. It's got beautiful lines to it, but you can see in the image at the bottom, it was possibly altered at some point to accept a bayonet with a bayonet lug on the bottom for his military use. Here are three more. Corporal Roger Brown carried the fowling piece at the top from the Framingham Minutemen. They came into the fight around Elmbrook Hill on the Lincoln Concord line, somewhere in that area. And all of these guns have had some things done to them in the 19th century, but they're all April 19th guns. The one in the middle is Captain John Parker. The barrel's been shortened on that gun. And the one at the bottom, Samuel Dakin from Lincoln, that gun was also shortened at some point in the 19th century. Now, the British commented on provincial arms also as to what types were being carried. One account says these fellows were generally good marksmen, and many of them used long guns made for duck shooting. Another commented at Bunker Hill, their firelocks are very long, some near 7 feet. So they're talking about fowling pieces. This article was in an English newspaper and was printed in the Massachusetts Spy on December 8, 1774. It says, besides the regular trained militia in New England, all the planters' sons and servants are taught to use the fowling piece from their youth and generally fire single balls with great exactness at fowl or beast. A gentleman well acquainted with that country is confident that 4 provinces can muster upwards of 12,000 of these marksmen in 48 hours. I think that article exaggerates a little bit the marksmanship of the men there, but he under the number of 12,000, they actually had over 13,000 men and upwards of 23,000 when the siege began. And a great example of what collectors call a Massachusetts parts gun, or a Frankenstein gun is this one in the Fort Ticonderoga collection, carried by John Gordon from Stowe. He marched on April 19th. He didn't get into the fight, but he was mortally wounded at Bunker Hill. The lock, trigger guard, side plate, butt plate are all from an older French musket. The barrel is about a fowling piece bore, 0.62, and it's got a great maple stock on it. This is a wonderful example of a parts gun. The other types of arms that were here were older French arms, model 1728 muskets. Thousands of those were captured during the French and Indian War and were for sale in Boston all the way up through 1774-75. And in this newspaper article, Nathan Putnam from Danvers, he was wounded in Menotomy, what's now Arlington, and he wrote, the article mentions that he was in Captain Hutchinson's company, and he was then badly wounded, but he had lost a French firelock marked D number 6 with a marking iron on the breech. Said Putnam carried it to a crossroad near a mill. That's Cutter's Mill in Arlington, diagonally across the street from the Jason Russell House. Whoever has said gun in possession is desired to return it to Colonel Mansfield of Lynn or to the selectmen of Danvers, and they shall be well rewarded for their trouble. We do know that he never got his gun back. because I found this document at Mass Archives where December 13th, 1775, he was paid for his nursing and loss of time, as well as for his missing firelock. One of the biggest misnomers we hear all the time is that everybody was carrying the same gun. Um, there were some older King's arms that were being carried by militia. The biggest shipment of those came over in late 1755. There was 2,000 that were used by the province of Massachusetts. So they were lent out to soldiers, and you would have to pay if the gun was not returned. And many of these did disappear. There were also English commercial guns that were available for use. So there would have been some King's arms in the ranks, but not as many as everybody tells you when you're watching documentaries. This is a great document that I found on the back of another piece of paper at Mass Archives, and it's the number of bullets to a pound each gun carries in Captain Turner's company. And it's dated June 1775. And if you look up to the left, you see the 14 ball per pound, which would be the King's arms range. There's some a little bit bigger, the 12 ball per pound. There could be some older Dutch guns or some parts guns made with earlier barrels. But the bulk of the guns in this company in the 20, 22, 26 range, those are all consistent with being fowling pieces. So now that we've talked about the guns and the ammunition, back in 2019, I made a visit to the Jason Russell House in Arlington, which I've been to a bunch of times. But I looked at it a little bit differently as I went through and looked at some of the bullet holes after doing all the ballistic studies. We realized that, as we looked at where a shot went through, that we ended up finding where it hit afterwards. And then we found bullet holes that they didn't even know they had in the house. So we decided at that point that we should do a bullet strike study of the house, which actually expanded into all known bullet strikes and bullet struck objects. And we were going to use modern forensic techniques. So we're using modern technology, ballistics rods, lasers, and other things that law enforcement use in forensic cases, and adapting it to a historical context. So that would help us to gain a lot more data than if we didn't use the modern technology. So I'm going to go through the bullet strikes in a chronological order. That's not the way we did the project. We started with Jason Russell House first, but it makes more sense to go through it this way. So the first bullet strike appears in the Elisha Jones house as the British light infantry were retreating from North Bridge. And this is a portion of the Elisha Jones house. If you drive from the North Bridge back down towards Concord Center, you'll see it on the left. And as a kid, the superintendent of the park, I went to elementary school with his son. So we used to hang out in this house all the time. And I remember looking at the bullet strike as a kid. And it was kind of cool to go back in and do some more research on it. But the bullet struck the shed just in front of this arrow. Now, at the time, this center section was separated from the house, and it was a one-story shed. In 1865, it was dragged up and attached to the house. The carriage house section on the left was added, and they added a second story for a bowling alley for the owner's kids upstairs. But people have been going to visit this bullet strike for a long time. This is Concordian Margaret Thornton in 1934, stopping by for a visit. And here it is today. The bullet strike is behind plexiglass. So it was kind of hard to get a measurement on it. We had to go by what the architectural historian had done in the cultural land, the historic structure report for the park. And it was about 0.71 and change. So it's consistent with being fired from a British musket. And here's the inside. You can see there's a little bit of wood blowout on the feather edge sheathing. There's a stud right in the middle. That stud was added more than likely in 1865. But where the white arrow is, you can see the intact feather edge sheathing. And then the two yellow arrows, you can see where the shot went through and blew the wood out. So as a part of the study, we had house sections made from original 18th century materials and took them to the range and shot at them. Here is a shot through the section that we had built. And you can see here both shots that we took at this one section. The upper shot where the scale is it shows typical wood blowout on the back. And the next one down, we tried to hit as close as we could to the feather edge sheathing. And you can see we hit near a knot, so it blew out a little bit more wood than the original shot, but it still is a pretty close example of what it would have looked like. As the British retreated out of Concord, they were fired on again at Merriam's Corner, up by Elmbrook Hill, Parker's Revenge, and then coming back down by Fisk Hill. James Hayward of Acton stopped at the well purportedly to get a drink at the Fisk house. And the earliest mention of this incident is April 25th, 1775. Mr. James Howard and one of the regulars discharged their pieces at the same instant, and each killed the other. Rebecca Fisk, who lived in the house, had taken her elderly father-in-law away, and she came back after the fighting had passed. And she mentions in 1827 finding two wounded British soldiers in her house, a dead British soldier on the front steps, and the third was a young American employing his dying breath in prayer. A bullet had passed through his body, taking off in its course the lower part of his powder horn. The name of this youthful patriot was J. Haywood, or Hayward, of Acton. His father came and carried his body home. It now lies in Acton graveyard. And on the right side of the screen is a wonderful portrait of Rebecca Fisk later in life. And I knew this picture existed for a long time, and I had heard rumors it was in Concord, but it came up for auction a couple of years ago and ended up in the Old Sturbridge Village collection, who were nice enough to let me use this image of Rebecca. But if you look up in the corner, you can see it's a painting within a painting. And that event was so important to her that she had a picture of the incident, more allegorical, but it's a picture of Hayward and the British soldiers shooting each other by the well on the side of the property. And here is James Hayward's original powder horn. You can see where the round ball went through down by the plug and came through the other side. The existing plug that's in it now was replaced in the 19th century by his grandnephew, Stevens Hayward, and he made a silver band around it and an escutcheon to commemorate the event before he donated it to the Acton Memorial Library. So again, with a lot of these things, we tried to replicate the shot the best we could. But again, with the windage, it's going to be really hard to hit some of these things as closely as we wanted to. But in this case, we came fairly close, but it was a good example of how horrific this wound would have been. We had layers of replica cloth on the ballistics gelatin. And at the end of the day, when we were done with our shooting, we took that block back to my house and we cut it open, and we were able to pull all the fragments and the ball out. And you can see how really horrific that wound would have been for James Hayward, with the bits of cloth, the shards of horn, and in this case, the musket ball split in half. Obviously, we don't know if that happened to Hayward, but this was a good representative example of really how bad he would have been wounded. As the British retreated down back through Lexington Center, the Merritt Monroe House stood on the right-hand side. Still there today, but you can see this great detail of it in Amos Doolittle's Plate 1. And here it is now. Obviously, it's had a lot of renovations done. They've added to the sides and to the back. But on April 19th, a British soldier was in the backyard of the house, probably where the addition is now, fired a shot through a window, which went up and lodged in the garret rafter. Here it is today. They've finished the attic, but you can see right here, it's filled in with plaster, like so many of the bullet holes were. And there's a little V mark above it where it looks like something pried the ball out. And that's exactly what happened. The musket ball you see was the one that was pried out of that beam and is in the collection of the Lexington History Museums. You can still see the wood embedded in the ball from when it struck. And I also did a lot of newspaper searches for this to see if I could find more information. And in 1915, there was work being done on the house. And it says inside, the workmen found two bullet holes, one on the right of the front door and the other in the roof. In the latter case, the bullet was traced to where it had embedded itself in a heavy timber. Apparently, both shots were fired in the Battle of Lexington. Bullet holes have been found in the Buckram Tavern, as opposed to Buckman, on the other side of the Battle Green, but it was not until yesterday that it was known that the Monroe house had been hit. It had also been hit. There was a dresser, a chest on chest inside the house where a bullet went through the chest and it was still inside. A descendant owns it, but we haven't been able to track it down, sadly. Diagonally across the street is Buckman Tavern. And from about where I took this picture, a British soldier fired a shot at the front door. And the original front door exists. It's on display inside Buckman Tavern. You can see the ballistics rod where the ball went through at an angle. Here's the entrance hole, again, consistent with being fired from a British musket. And then where it came through the other side, and there's remnants of plaster that are still embedded in the hole. They popped it out at some point for display purposes. And then again, doing newspaper searches, I found this newspaper article. In the house owned by the family of the late Reverend Caleb Stetson of Lexington is a bullet hole made at the battle, April 19, 1775. Though nearly 100 years ago, all the clapboards around the hole are in a good state of preservation. So after reading this article, I emailed Lexington History Museums again and asked them if they had any other bullet-struck stuff. And they came back with, oh yeah, we have a clapboard with a bullet hole in it. And again, it's consistent with being fired from a British musket. So it was about this time, just on the east side of Lexington Center, where Lord Percy arrived with 1,000 reinforcements. And Reverend William Gordon wrote, but a little on this side, Lexington Meeting House, where they were met by the brigade with cannon under Lord Percy, the scene changed. What he's trying to say is the fighting got even worse. You would have been shocked at the destruction which has been made by the regulars, as they are miscalled. Had you been present with me to have beheld it, many houses were plundered of everything valuable that could be taken away, and what could not be carried off was destroyed. And Percy made his temporary headquarters at Monroe Tavern, just to the east of Lexington Center. And a shot was fired from somewhere near where I was standing, went through the window and hit the taproom ceiling. You can see it's been carefully preserved here. There was purportedly other bullet strikes in the structure, but they've been removed when they were doing renovation work. There was one mentioned as being in the wainscoting, but there's no more wainscoting left in the house. So some of the bullet strikes have been lost, while they saved this one in the ceiling. William Monroe Sr., Sergeant William Monroe, who owned the tavern's father, this portrait of him was hanging in Monroe Tavern at the time. And although he had died in 1747, he still was wounded on April 19th, shot in the arm. And the great thing about this painting is nobody repaired it professionally. So measuring the hole, again, this is through a painting. It was about 0.70. So again, consistent with a British musket, although being in canvas, it's not going to be exact. But thank goodness that nobody repaired this, because this is a wonderful survivor of April 19th. There's a great letter from an unidentified British officer from the 4th Regiment of Foot in a friend's collection. And we've transcribed it in full in the book. But one of the great quotes he wrote about how the fighting was happening was this one. From eagerness, you would see a party of soldiers firing at the front of a house and another on its rear, whilst the main body were pelting away at the upper windows, by which means many of our own people fell even after they were in the house, and all the world could not prevent it. So British soldiers, he's talking about, are firing from the main body on the road. They're firing from around the houses, while British soldiers are in the houses shooting. So it's just the combat at this point got really, really vicious and brutal. He also wrote, in one of those sallies, I had a very narrow escape, having a grenadier of the 5th, a soldier of ours, and a Marine killed all around me. But we soon got into the house, and I counted 11 Yankees dead in it in the orchard. One villain had 73 balls in his bag and 2 horns of powder. Now, I don't know how he had time to count all the balls and such, but the 11 Yankees, he actually missed one. There was a 12th killed at the Jason Russell house. Lieutenant John Bacon, who was killed in the backyard behind the barn. So this officer probably didn't see him, but he did manage to count all the other 11 who were killed on the property. Another militiaman, Minuteman, on April 19th, Amos Farnsworth. He came down after the fighting, and he wrote about what he saw in Lexington. Came to Lexington, where much hurt was done to the houses there by breaking glass and burning many houses. But they was forced to retreat, though they was more numerous than we. And I saw many dead regulars by the way. Went into a house where blood was half over shoes. So the house that he went into, again, was the Jason Russell house. There's a later account that Jason Russell's wife had mentioned that the blood was ankle deep in the kitchen. They'd taken the 12 bodies of the dead soldiers into her kitchen and laid them out on the floor. But that quote may have been adapted from this one by Farnsworth, where he talked about the blood half over his shoes. And here's the Jason Russell House, owned by the Arlington Historical Society. Great place if you haven't been there. They have a wonderful museum, as well as being able to go through and see some of the bullet strikes. So I'm going to go through some of those. We've got the parlor downstairs. A shot came through possibly a window pane and went through this piece of panel, and you can see Doug with a ballistics rod. It went through the panel, the lath and plaster, and it skipped off of the newel post for the stairs. You can see where it hit and more than likely went out the front door or hit the front door. And we did some testing. Obviously, we weren't going to be able to go through the panel, the lath and plaster, and hit the newel post. But we did set up a section and shot at it to see how it affected the lath and plaster. And this, again, was made using original materials. So all of the wood was really good condition, recycled from houses that were taken down from about 1727-ish, around the same time the Jason Russell house was built. You can see here is the entrance through the panel. And then the exit, we did this twice, and both of them left kind of an oval hole in the plaster. Parlor upstairs, the parlor chamber. Here's Doug putting a scale by the bullet hole. This one, when we put the ballistics rod in it, went right out with the laser. The laser went right out onto Mass Ave. So you can see that that shot was more than likely fired from someone in the main body, as our unidentified officer from the 4th Foot mentioned. Like I said, you can see right where that posted is where the beam went out. On the other side of that panel was a secret closet. And I tried to get up in there, but obviously it was like putting a cork in a bottle. I couldn't get inside. But archaeologist Mary Jane Balicki, she was thin enough to be able to climb up in there. And she was able to get a shot of the other side of the panel where you can see the wood blowout. But the exciting thing is she was able to see where that bullet reached its terminal velocity. And it had hit the attic stair riser right here. And while she was in there, we actually gave her a presumptive lead test, which turned pink, which is positive for lead residue. So it looks like there was still residue left from that ball that struck. Luckily, because nobody had been up there in there and nobody had touched it in 245 years. Another shot was fired from the south side of the house up towards the kitchen parlor window. It came through the other side, and you can see the laser beam. The laser was where the ball went next with the ballistics rod, and it came right back down to this strike here. Here it is, close up. Typical wood blowout and filled with plaster. But then the shot went across the room, went up through the panel separating the room, came out the other side, and then skipped off the ceiling. Downstairs in the kitchen, there's a door to the cellar. There were provincial soldiers from Beverly and possibly other towns who had run in and hid in the basement. And British soldiers were shooting at them through the door. Now the door is replaced. It was removed in 1895, and nobody knows where it went. But inside of the door jamb, around the corner, there's a a bullet hole from where the bullet went through, probably the door trim, and then it hit the stair riser. And another one had gone through the door and hit the stair riser. And here you can see both of them on the other side, again, with that typical wood blowout from being struck by a round ball. We also moved some things around in the attic. There was a lot of replaced sheathing up there, but by the north side window, where the main body would have been marching by, we found 2 bullet strikes near the window. So again, the British soldiers are outside of the house firing at the windows. Another one we almost missed is this one. It was so dark, it almost looked like one of the pegs for the stairs, for the posts. But when we got up and looked at it, it was filled with plaster. And then here's the other side. The ball didn't go all the way through. That thick oak post, it must have just kind of poked through the other side, and then they pried it out. We checked it with a metal detector, but then it was smoothed out, filled with plaster. So one of the other things we wanted to do is 3D laser scanning, and Feldman Geospatial was kind enough to give us pro bono work. So they were able to scan the house and the entire property, which enabled us to see it from a different light. So there's this kind of cool cutaway of the house where you can see the different chambers in the attic. And actually, you can see some of the replaced sheathing in the attic in this image. But it also enabled us to do a trajectory analysis to lay out all the shots. So you can see all the white lines or all the bullet strikes that remain in the house. There were probably more that through updates and construction work are now gone. But thank goodness we still have all of these bullet strikes to help us better understand the fighting. There was also people who had said that the house had been moved. And I've been told this at talks before. And then when you ask them, well, where's the documentation? It doesn't matter. It was just moved. Okay, well, we went through every image of the house, every drawing of the house. We looked at the foundation where there's 18th century plaster, and then above it, right by the sill, was more modern Portland cement. But we also had GSSI, Geophysical Survey Systems, Inc., who builds GPR, ground penetrating radar equipment. They donated their time to come out and do the entire property. And what we did is we had them do the whole thing, and we were continuing our research to see if it had been moved. And the only account of saying anything about the house moving at all is this one. It says Russell Teal, a descendant of Jason Russell. At his death in 1896, the house passed out of the family, and a subsequent owner moved it partly off its original foundations to install a furnace. So it seems the house was picked up, the furnace was installed, and they replaced the chimney at the time. But the house was never really moved. And GSSI's analysis revealed no evidence that the Jason Russell house was ever relocated to its current location. Just to the east of the Jason Russell house is the Captain William Adams house. And this is a wonderful daguerreotype image of it, probably right before it was raised in 1855. A great image of it with the tree, and you can see around it, although it's 1855, compared to all the other houses, it looks like an antique sitting there by itself. But when the house was taken down, they were putting a railroad in towards Lexington. The owner of the estate, Mr. Josiah Russell, was taking pains to secure every bullet found in the building and disposed of them at the rate of $1 each. Yesterday afternoon, a small piece of clapboard, which had been perforated by a bullet, was sold for $50. So you have to imagine in 1855, selling a bullet for $1. That was a lot of money, as was this piece of clapboard for $50. This is one of the pieces that was sold in 1855, a piece of paneling with a bullet strike in it in the collection of the Arlington Historical Society. And there's also this panel from the door of the house. And there's a note with it. It says front door panel of Captain William Adams' house, Arlington, pierced by a British bullet, April 19th, 1775. You can see the hole in the exit hole with wood blowout. The hole is actually 0.60. So more than likely that was a provincial overshot that went through from a fowling piece, not from a British musket. Here's another bullet, one of the ones that was sold in 1855. And there's a great newspaper article that talks about the house coming down. It says they've just pulled down the old building at the corner, which is full of bullets from both sides. They split up the boards and sold the bullets for $1 a piece. On the northwest side, of course, the bullets were those of the advancing Americans. On the south side, the retreating English. So you could buy a Whig or a Tory bullet at your pleasure. The other thing that survives in the collection of the Arlington Historical Society are a few bullet-struck shutters, including this one you can see on the left, where the bullet went through the shutter and the backside where it came out. And this had a note to it, said it was taken from the Amos Whittemore house. Amos Whittemore lived in that property in 1790, 1800, and wasn't there in 1775, but through some research, Ebenezer Bradish Jr. lived in the house, and his wife left an account that the house was struck at least 100 times as the British retreated. We also found this bifold shutter there, and you can see on the left where the bullet went in, and then on the right where it went out, and there's some remnants of plaster in there. So at one point, that hole was plastered closed. But as we looked at the shutter more, we realized that it was struck another 3 times, and they had plastered the holes. And of course, we had to do the obligatory shooting of a shutter. We had a 19th century replica of an 18th century shutter that we shot. See here some of the bullet holes going in, and then a couple of them going out. Again, that typical wood blowout. So there are some things, and we knew when we published the book and we did our research, and we hoped that more things would be found. And a year ago at Christmas, my phone lit up. People started messaging me about a curious item at auction and wanted to know if I knew about it. And remember the article about the Captain William Adams house. The owner of the estate, Mr. Josiah Russell, takes pains to secure every bullet found in the building and disposes them at the rate of $1 each. Yesterday afternoon, a small piece of clapboard, which had been perforated by a bullet, was sold for $50. Well, the piece that appeared was that 4-inch by 2-inch piece of clapboard that was sold in July 1855. And it had been framed with this piece of mahogany and a window on each side. And it had been owned by Jared Sparks, who was a historian, minister. He was also president of Harvard College and lived in Cambridge. So he's the one who had purchased this for $50 in 1855. Here's the other view with the glass through the hole. And when it came up for auction a year ago, it bumped up pretty quickly. The estimate was $1,000 to $2,000. Very quickly, it was at $4,750. And within a minute, it ended up going up to $25,000, which is what it hammered for. And that doesn't include the buyer's premium. So this 4-inch by 2-inch piece of clapboard sold for $30,000. A little more than the $50 that Jared Sparks paid for it. All right, so I'm going to end up here. Here's our book. If you haven't read it, it's available on Amazon as well as from the publisher, Mowbray Publications. We do have one celebrity endorsement, and that's Kurt Russell. He is the 8th great grandson of Jason Russell, who was killed at the Jason Russell house on his own property. He got 2 copies of it, and I guess according to his agent, he liked it so much he got 6 more for other family members. So he bought 8 copies of our book, which we're pretty happy about. All right. Well, that's about it.
All right. Thank you, Joel. That was a great presentation. It strikes me as you're going through all this, again, what we're trying to do at OSC for the 250 is really link so much of the memory making around the revolution. And it really seems that without a lot of these artifacts surviving that people decide to save as that early recording of the memory of the revolution, that a lot of this proof wouldn't be there for you. It's really critical to the work you were doing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things, we put in our, at the beginning of our book is, thanking those who had the, thought to save all these things. And it enabled us to do the work that we're doing today. And I have to tell you, I do a lot of research. This was really fun. Doing, a lot of time at the range, and a lot of time digging through newspapers, and it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, so we do have some questions coming in. I would encourage people to either enter things into the chat or into the Q&A function. The first question we have coming in is how mass-produced or standardized were the musket balls?
Okay, so that depended on whose musket balls they were. So as far as the British, they were being manufactured for the British Army by contractors at Woolwich, and they would be shipped over sometimes in cartridges, and a lot of times the British would roll their own cartridges, which you can see in Gage's orderly book before April 19th and after, where guys are being sent out to roll them. But on the other side, towns in Massachusetts from the 17th century had to have a stock of arms and ammunition for those who couldn't afford it. So a lot of the stuff they're buying, it's all readily available. So they're purchasing a lot of those things. But there were also people who had, step down or gang molds, and would cast their own using bar lead that you could purchase in Boston or at any other, most Worcester, many of these places you could buy whatever you needed, to whether you needed gun parts, a sword, or musket balls, flints, you could get all that stuff in the marketplace.
Great. So we're waiting for some other questions to come in, but I have a follow-up question for you, Joel. So I know when you were doing this research, we were talking about this a little bit, being that here at the village, we also fire flintlock muskets and rifles for the public as demonstrations. What did you find for differences between the accuracy levels and the performance of the British muskets compared to especially the American fowling pieces?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So the British muskets, they're okay accuracy wise, not great. But the fowling pieces, I have a couple, I have three custom built guns. And the gun with a 55-inch barrel and a .60 inch bore, at 100 yards, we were hitting the target every time. So it was interesting that gun also had a much higher velocity. Obviously, a smaller ball, but it had a much higher velocity than the Army muskets did, the King's Arms. So that gun was very accurate. And again, like I said, the velocity was higher. We just did a test recently where we took a pattern 56, that fowling piece with a 55-inch barrel and a French 1728, and we fired 10-shot strings recording the velocity on all of those guns. We weighed the musket shot that went into each one. And obviously, and this makes total sense, is that as you fire the gun more, you have fouling in the barrel. And the fouling in the barrel ends up constricting it a little bit more, and you end up with a higher velocity. So you could see in our graph charts afterwards that the velocity was climbing the more shots that you did. So again, if your windage is, if the ball's not too small for the bore, with more firing, it's probably going to get a little bit more accurate.
Okay, interesting. So another question following up on that, in the types of shot used, did you find evidence the colonists fired shot like birdshot or buckshot from their fowlers on April 19th?
So through our archaeology projects, we just did one, well, just a year ago, August, we did Elmbrook Hill, which formerly known as Bloody Angle. We did that whole area, and the report hasn't been released yet, so I can't talk too much about it. But I think through that project, Parker's Revenge, I did a project for National Grid on the Bluff, Northbridge. I think we found two pieces of buckshot. Now, that's not to say they didn't use it, but they're not using it as much as it seems. Round ball. We know I have some loss returns from guys who were wounded or killed on April 19th, and they list buckshot in their bags or their pouches. But there's not a lot that we found archaeologically to show that they were using, an equal amount of buck and ball. There's not that many that we found.
Okay. So another question also relating to ammunition, how many balls would British and American soldiers typically carry, and then how much would that weigh?
Okay, so the British soldier on April 19th was ordered to have 36 rounds in their cartridge box and their pouch. So in the British Army, a pouch and strap is over your shoulder, and a cartridge box is worn around the waist. The cartridge box worn around the waist would have 18 cartridges in it, and then your cartridge box could have 26 or 29. But they weigh about an ounce. They're basically an ounce a ball. There's a little bit of weight there between the two.
Okay, great. Well, I guess in ending this here, I have one question, and this I'm sure you could go on forever with the answer to this question here. But thinking about again the memory of the Revolution, so many myths attached to the battles of Lexington and Concord. Are there any myths in particular that you really want to bust as part of this presentation, besides what you've already done here?
Well, I mean, there's oh my God. Wow, there's so many, Derek. I mean, people who watch, April Morning, they watch the scene in Buckman Tavern the night before where they're talking about how many rifles they have and how many pistols and blunderbusses and all this crap. First of all, New England was not, they were not keen on rifles here at that time. So there are no mentions of any rifles. We've never found any rifle ball. There's nothing in any of the documents that talk about it, yet people still to this day think these guys in their shirt sleeves grabbed the rifle from over the fireplace and went out and beat the British Army without any training beforehand, without any forethought. And frankly, that's all crap. I even had, when I was, we were talking about the Nova documentary before we did it. There was a historian who was going to talk about the reason the British casualties were so high was because all the rifles that were fired at Bunker Hill. And it's like, oh, no, no, there were no rifles at Bunker Hill. But it's an easy excuse to say, well, that's why we lost so many men, is because of these rifled guns they had. But that's just not the case. So one of the main things with me is the rifle theory that everybody has.
Mm, that's a good one. And it's true. I mean, because I mean, we in the early 19th century here in New England, rifle companies become very popular, but that's when rifles became more popular both for militia service and for target shooting and things like that. So Sturbridge in the 1830s had a rifle company, and there were lots of them throughout the state. So they became much, much more popular in the early 19th century than you ever would have seen in 1775. So that's a great point to drive home.
Yeah, 100%. And there was I can't remember what town it was. It might have been North Andover. At one of the auctions, I saw this. It was the militia book, and it had all of the stuff from their companies from like 1760 up through the 1840s. And you see nothing about rifles. And then all of a sudden, 18 teens, 1820s, you start to see rifles popping up. And then they actually have a rifle company, like you said. And then makers all over, Alvin Pratt and Concord and all these others are building all these half stock rifles, and it becomes more of a fad. But in the 1770s, they just weren't popular here at all.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I think we'll end it there, Joel. But thank you again. What an awesome presentation. Really fascinating work you've been doing in this. And we look forward to hearing what else you come up with, these other ballistic studies you're doing. Joel's book is available here in the OSV store. So come and get a copy while you can. And this presentation will be posted on YouTube after the fact. So if you didn't catch everything and would like to check it out afterwards or rewatch anything for more information, it'll be posted soon. So thank you again, Joel, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.